I know that optically traditional investors are looking for a number north of 80 because there's so many calculations they're used to doing in their head about like below that. Okay, for north of 90 for enterprise, north of 80 for SMB. But for example, when I was at Upserve, our GRR was 75%, because 25% of businesses, restaurants, go out of business every year. It's the industry. It's like, well, like the industry kind of is terrible. Well, not terrible. I mean, I love the restaurant industry. I just invested in a restaurant, but like, just as a business, it's hard. Low gross margin. Like anyway, you get all that. So I think there are reasons why some companies can maintain a lower gross retention rate, which feels natural. If you have like a prosumer business or something like this, where they're acting like consumers, you maybe have to think about your retention rate like consumer businesses do. Like, I don't know, in that way. And then just make sure that the math works so that like your CAC, what it costs you to acquire that person over time, pays back quickly, but that you make it back. So again, I don't know. It's just like, a number objectively like needs to be somewhere is kind of like, okay, so that's kind of my thought on that.
I guess HubSpot is an example of a company that had exactly that issue, right? They had really high churn. They had similar churn to consumer businesses.
Wow.
And they found a way over time to get their net revenue retention into a healthy zone. But early on, they made the math work well enough to get to a stage where they could make the NRR work.
And I mean, Andrea and David Weiner did this at Electric in a sort of in a brilliant way of just saying like, here's what the math says. Here's how much money we can put into the top of the machine. You want to get to 30 million, 50 million, 100 million in ARR. Here's how you do it. And that's awesome because exactly to her point, so many people are led to believe that if you don't have 80% gross retention, then you're not allowed to be a company.
Right.
And what I've said the whole time, first of all, you are allowed to be a company if you make more than you spend, period, no matter what. And second, you're allowed to grow if your customer acquisition cost isn't so high, then you can afford to have high retention. Fundamentally, afford to have high churn. Fundamentally, high churn means you can't spend as much on sales and marketing to grow because it's just going to put your unit economics out of whack. So what does all that mean? That means that if Pavilion is at a moment where it has high churn, but we still have 4-to-1 CAC to LTV to CAC, that means that we can still grow if we want. We can still grow. Now the point that I would make, the only thing I would say, and I would love to hear Andrea's response to this response, which is there's two factors, right? You can do that in a large TAM environment, right? If you don't think you've scratched the surface of the total number of possible customers and you think that still most of the world has never heard about you in your ICP, then yes, it's a math problem. And it's a math problem and a detective problem. And it's a detective problem to find the channels that you can put the money to work in to scale your growth. But the second part is, yes, also, if you're churning out a ton of people, the best lever for growth tends to be word of mouth. And that means that if the people are leaving and telling their friends that your product isn't very good, then yeah, theoretically it's a math problem, but the system is dynamic, not static, right? Yeah. It's like people are telling their friends, it's becoming harder and harder. Nothing is stable. It was 4-to-1 until you got into this next tranche of customers that aren't quite the ICP. And now all of a sudden it's 2.5-to-1. And now you're underwater on your math. All of that, however, is still to say, to tell companies out there that have high churn, you're still allowed to grow. You still can grow. You have to look at your unit economics, but you still can grow if your market is large and you have the right relationship between customer acquisition and retention. And it's okay to have high churn if you have low CAC.
100%. And I would say, I am sort of assuming your TAM is large enough when I make that comment about the math problem. It's purely just look at it on a spreadsheet to see if you're making more money than you're spending kind of thing. But the other thing is, this is why I mentioned GRR first. I do think gross retention is a signal of whether or not your product is beloved, and because people are voting with their dollars. So don't discount that because that's actually the problem to solve. It's not, you can still grow and you're still a business and you should care, but But if people like what they see, but then they're leaving for other reasons, just focus on that. And one other thing about the math, truly, new customer acquisition, those customers are the ones that tend to expand faster, have higher NDR than those that have been sitting around a long time.